Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of SpyCam. I'm Marty. I'm one of the founders of Splyce, the pro team, as well as event listings, anything you want to watch in esports and editorial. Anybody you're looking to hear about what's going on in the scene of esports across different games, you can see some of the best writers out there talking about what's going on in the community. I am joined here today by none other than Thorin, the Esports Historian. Thorin, thanks for being here.
All right, mate. What's up?
Hey, I know we're going to get the usual, everybody theoretically knows who you are, but for the sake of that one person in the audience who's never heard of Thorn before, why don't you give a little bit of your background?
Well, listen, I know you're a beginning interviewer, Marty, so it's actually a classic mistake to ask someone to introduce themselves because then you're entirely at their whim of what they say. So I'll just say that I was someone who's been around esports a long time and a lot of things happened in my life, but this isn't my life story in this part of the interview. So was a long time, was in Quake, was in Counter-Strike, later on in StarCraft 2, League of Legends, and then that's basically how we got to today.
Excellent. And for those who don't know, Thorn has been writing freelance on a number of sites. He writes for us for about 4 or 5 months now. Produces a couple of weekly columns, one on Counter-Strike and one on League of Legends, so you can also check him out there. So for those of you who haven't seen a Spy Camp podcast before, we try to bring on different people throughout the industry to talk about the portion of the industry they work on, give a little bit of insight into how that part of the industry works, and give some background so people maybe who are interested in this particular, we're looking at journalism, and how someone might be breaking into there. Thorn, I mean, you're obviously one of those folks who's been in the industry a very long time, which is uh, almost unusual at this point, I'd say, for some of the people working on the business side of esports. Can you give me a little bit of how you ended up being specifically a journalist? Why journalism in esports?
Well, the thing is, I actually didn't know anything about journalism when I came into the area. I just basically, literally one day, thought to myself, like there hasn't been any good interviews for a while in Quake. Like, oh, if at the time everyone used IRC, which is a chat program where you could publicly join channels that famous players would be in. And since there wasn't a lot of fans back then, it's not as though people who were pros had to hide away. They would just be in the same channels as everyone else would. So I actually thought to myself, I mean, even though I'm not a journalist, I don't know anything about journalism. I mean, technically, I could just ask these players whatever questions I have myself, like
Right.
directly. I could just message this guy right now. So at the time, was doing a computing course, so I knew the basics of how to do HTML. So my initial plan was just do a couple of interviews with some players that I was interested in, and then I would make a basic website in HTML. This is like the beginnings of the 2000s, so you didn't have to have a very good website back then. And my
Right.
logic was I would just put them up on this website. But in doing so, because I mean, I guess I always have a slightly different way of doing things to other people. Rather than just do one interview and then make the site and then put up that one thing, I even back then thought to myself, like, oh, well, if you're going to make a site, then you should probably try and like start it with a splash, and do a really good job. So I actually, before I put up the first interview, I did 10 interviews. I just went around the scene and I did interviews with a bunch of different players. And in doing so, I did an interview with a Russian player. And another person in the Russian scene actually messaged me and he said, like, oh, why did you do an interview with this player? Because he obviously had never heard of me. And so I said, oh, I'm going to make a website. I've got a bunch of interviews. I'm going to put it up there. And he said, oh, actually, I have a Russian website and I want to make an English one where the idea is we would translate like the Russian content onto the English one. And then if you do content on the English one, we'd translate it over. So why don't you just join me? I've already got like the website made, basically. I'll make an English section and you will manage that basically, and that's essentially how I got into the scene. Just did a couple of interviews I was interested in, but then had some interesting opportunities arise that just kept me going piece by piece until eventually better things could happen.
So it's almost you're almost serving yourself in a way by giving yourself the opportunity, like you said, to talk to some of these people that you wanted to know the answers to these questions. In a way, now you're delivering these back to people who theoretically might have the same want to know the same things as you did, but you were kind of serving yourself in a way.
I mean, I've only ever served myself. Like, at no point in time will you ever find an interview or a piece where I say like, oh, and thanks to the fans, they're like the only reason I'm here, and like I do everything for the fans. I try to give you guys what you want. I don't do that in any way. I explicitly only do content that I find interesting, that I think has some sort of value, that I think in itself has some merit to it, beyond the scope of whether or not people will enjoy it. Now, along the years, I had to learn how to kind of get a sense for what people do want, but more in the sense of then you can do work where it is something you want to do, but it also will match up with what there is an audience for.
Right.
And when you combine the two there, that's where you'll have your best success. But I also think sometimes you should also do some content that, for example, won't go over that well, but maybe it is just something you think is really valuable or there's something important. Because at the end of the day, if you follow that kind of a path, you're always reflecting on what you yourself think is important, and that's like going to be a guide that can serve you many years. Whereas if you go by what the people want, first of all, people can be very fickle. Like they might say they want something that actually turns out they don't want. And also ultimately, I think if you want to do any kind of original or creative or novel work, you definitely can't ask people because they themselves won't know what they want. Because if it's something they've never seen before, how can they know they want it yet? I mean, this is the basis on which all great new products or thoughts are created. You can't ask someone, well, what would you like me to invent for you? They wouldn't know. So.
It's interesting you say that because since we came in as a tech company first, building the web tool for people, I read up on a lot. What do great tech companies do? What does Facebook do? Twitter, things like that. And you'll see time and time again that one of the things that people say is don't go ask them, what do you want me to build? Because people will tell you what they want you to build. They're almost always wrong. It's not they're wrong because they are telling you incorrect information. They just don't know the answer themselves. And the better thing is to figure out what their problem is. And then your job is to go back and solve it. So you can connect that back to journalism, right? Like where are the gaps of information that might be lacking? And people might say, I want you to look at this and that. But this particular thing they're saying, it's not that they have the right solution, but they are stating, I have a problem. I think this solves my problem. Can you therefore do this? And it's up to you, journalism, tech, whatever, to find what is the right solution. Otherwise, you're not the right person for the job in the first place, right?
Sure, and it's like I say, like I essentially, because my own impetus to start was I literally thought to myself, well, here's some questions no one's asked in an interview, or here, this type of interview isn't done, and I'd like to see it. Because I started along that path, I think it put me in a position where, like I say, there was some factor that was guiding me, that there was like a logic behind what it was based on.
Right, absolutely. So you had this kind of, it's interesting. We haven't had anybody on this podcast yet that said, I went into do this thing in esports and then I did that thing in esports and I still do that thing in esports. Everyone's had kind of a non-traditional path,
Sure.
which I think is pretty common in the entertainment industry as a whole. I think that's pretty common because you get in and go, I want to be in entertainment, whether it's film, the movies, whatever, and you don't know exactly what it is you want to do in that area. What are some of the obstacles that were in your way into getting to where you are today, where you are a pretty big influence in the industry?
I think that actually one of the things I touched on before is probably the biggest thing was like, so say my career has lasted about, I mean, it's still like under 15 years. So let's say like 14 years I've been doing esports journalism. So when I started from that place of like, here's the things I want to do and I want to see. Okay, some of those things, did line up with what other people wanted to see. Because, for example, if I'm someone who knows a lot about this player and I do an interview that's quite in depth with him, odds are there will be other people who'll be interested in that player and they'll want to know some of those things as well. It won't be a perfect matchup, but of the 14 years, I would probably say the first, let's see, maybe like the first 9 or 10 of those years, I didn't really put any effort or even any thought into the notion of trying to figure out how to package what I'd done, like how to sell the notion to other people, how to promote it very well. In fact, famously, because when I was younger, I was so intent on this idea that it should only be like exactly to the specifications I want, and I should go as hard as I can into just trying to make the work as good as it can. That means I basically spent those first 9 or 10 years, all my effort was just on trying to improve my skills, like get my skills up to a better level, do better work, figure out what the next type of work to do is, branch into other areas, and improve my overall understanding of the industry. I put a lot of time and effort into that, but I put basically none into how to package it and how to have any showmanship or how to sell what I was doing. And so it was okay for a while. Like there would always be people in the scene who like liked my work as well, and so I could get jobs doing it. But the biggest problem is like I even naively thought that there was something pure about doing this approach. And so actually, famously, when I did interviews, my interview with Get Right would be called Interview with Get Right. It would never be called Get Right, interesting quote. It would never be called Get Right breaks it down in depth. I'd never put anything around it because my logic was, if you don't want to read an interview with Get Right, get out. If you want to read one with him, here's the best one, and I don't have to tell you why it's the best one. You're going to find out it's the best one. So a little bit naive because I didn't obviously know any of the business aspects of the job. But it coming into the era of like Twitter, and then later on as stuff like Reddit came along, which basically you can only survive in these areas if you learn how to promote yourself and the way to phrase something and the way to do. Essentially, you could do a fantastic article, but if at the very end, this is what most writers even today still do. We write the article, and at the very end, maybe 1 minute before we send the email with the article, we think, oh, yeah, what should I call it? And then they just think of a title in 1 second. And sometimes the title's rubbish, and they don't realize that will have a massive effect on whether anyone reads this article.
Absolutely.
Like, if you haven't done a good job, if it doesn't sound appealing, or even worse, let's say it's a fantastic article, but because the title doesn't convey any of like the maybe unique take you've put on something in it, it won't get the audience that you want, even though actually the guy out there does want to read it. You just haven't explained to him through the title how to do this. Now, some of the ways that I learned this were actually just from traditional journalism. Like one example is when I was doing a lot of my work maybe about 4 or 5 years ago was mainly like news posting, because I was working for SK, I was working for Racer, and a lot of that was just getting all the posts out that you need for these teams. When I found this technique in mainstream journalism called the pyramid. I can't remember, I think it's called like the pyramid, what's it called, diagram or something like that. And the logic of it is that each stage of the piece has to have a hierarchy to it. So the title should explain almost everything someone needs to know, but in the concept of only a sentence. I mean, obviously you can't put a lot in there, but it should be as explanatory as possible. Then the first line should sort of explain the story, but in a line or so, then the first paragraph should. And then the idea is if someone gets all the way past that, then you tell all the rest of the story, as much detail as you want, lay it out, structure it, do all the stuff you were going to do anyway. But if you just take this approach, you will make it way more likely that someone comes in and reads the whole thing. Because essentially it was designed for newspapers where someone might only see the headline, or they might only read the first paragraph and then they have to go to work and they leave the paper or whatever. It was designed to get the best information out there as quickly as possible. And then the concept is the person's engaging, they're buying in if they want to read more. So basic things like this that don't sound very, very revolutionary, just because they changed the way I thought about it. Like the title's got to be good and the concept to go with what I've written has to be appealing. When I thought of these aspects, these helped me overcome a lot of the things that beforehand meant that I was doing work that maybe was, let's say, 90% as good, but maybe it didn't have the same appeal to everyone.
Yeah, you're not getting the audience for it.
Yeah, it was limited in how it could reach the audience.
You know, I immediately think of two corollaries that people miss a lot of times. One is a press release. The example of a really poor press release is that you have this, first of all, it's long, right? It's long, but also you expect them to read the whole thing. And if you can't in the first paragraph tell them everything they need to know, then you failed in your press release, because most people are too busy and they want to know very quickly in a couple sentences if they should read any more. And if they read one or two and they go, not worth my time. And I think famously you'll see a lot of press releases come through that go, well, we have to tell them everything because they've never heard of us before. And it's like, if they want to write about you, they'll look you up, they'll find out some information, or they'll write you back even. And I think that that's a place people fail a lot, is give them what they need to know in just a couple sentences. Goes back to your title thing. The other one is Facebook talks about this when you work with them on a marketing end. If you look at a Facebook video, what's very different about Facebook versus anywhere else is how their videos autoplay. And they say the biggest thing people fail on is they take 5-6 second intros and then they have a talking head and and then no one watches the video. They don't know that this is actually a really killer video, but it starts at like 8 seconds in. And instead, if you take 1 second to say your brand and immediately tell people, oh, this is a Bjergsen pentakill, or this is, a Lou going nuts on a map, people go, oh, I actually want to click through and watch that. And they can see two identical videos have massive differences in engagement by doing that. And little tools like that, I think you're right, people miss that and can have your whole trajectory of your career change just because of something as small as that.
But the funny thing is, though, it's not as though like I was missing out on this and then all the other writers had figured it out. Or what's funny is I've noticed in esports in general, there actually seems to be almost a split in these two skill sets, like being really amazing technically at the job and being really good at selling that side of it, or explaining, basically translating what's good about it. So as a result, you do get a lot of people where they are just all the fluff. Like they've got all that mastered. And in all areas, we're talking about commentators, journalists, even as players. We see players, there's some famous examples you could give where they weren't very good as players, but they did a wicked job at selling their brand and keeping themselves relevant and doing the right interviews. And as a result, I want to see their interviews more than maybe some guy who's amazingly skilled, but he can't articulate what he wants to say. So I actually think it's a general problem that the esports industry itself has been figuring out over the years. And maybe my career, I might have been a bit slower on the uptake than some of that, but just for the sake of context for people who are wondering about other esports journalists, the problem was a lot of the really good ones, even now, still have the same problem. That's one of the things actually where some of them who I'm like more friends with and maybe they like ask me questions in like more of a mentor role. That's the main thing I try to stress to some of these guys who have fantastic writing skills. I'll be like, okay, now you have to figure out what your identity is as in terms of the public persona. Like, how are you going to sell this personality? How are you going to brand it? Because I know your writing's amazing, but it can't just be me telling everyone else it's great. You have to figure out how to do it. And so
Right.
the problem is on both sides of it, you get people who have that skill set, but maybe they haven't put enough effort in to actually making their work really good. Maybe they get off on the easy aspect of because they can sell something very, very well. They think the product doesn't have to be as good, but I think at the moment, not everyone's got both aspects really down,
Thorin,
it's something I still struggle with, but I have progressed certainly over the years.
I had a player tell me, no joke, he goes, look, I don't need to work on the social media because I'm just going to get really good at the game and then it'll come. And like, it makes you want to smack your head against the wall a little bit because you go, unless you're Faker, like that's probably not going to work, right? It's just probably not going to work. You have to approach from both sides. I often say to people, well, people forget because we use esports as a term, sports. Sports is in the entertainment industry, right? We are entertainers, first and foremost. There is this, obviously the reason that draws us in to begin with is we all love great competition. We love the sport side of it. I mean, I come from being a massive NBA fan, a massive tennis fan, American football, etc. over the years before I found esports 4 or 5 years ago. And what drew me into that was the competition side. What kept me there was the entertainment factor, the crazy dunk, the helmet catch, the comeback from 5-0 down in a tennis match, whatever it was. And so if you're an amazing player and you just don't have any entertainment factor with the fans, there's a lot of times where then you're almost irrelevant from your career progressing to, I shouldn't, irrelevant's the wrong word. Your career has missed the arc, right? You can be better as a player, but your opportunities are limited significantly by the fact that you haven't taken that other half of your career because you're an entertainer.
Well, and put it this way, you give the example of Faker. Like, the reason why Faker's a good example is because obviously the whole point is if he wanted as a luxury to not do any of these things, he could because he's that good and he's already winning everything. So he's already front and center. But actually, even Faker would benefit if he put more effort into this area. And for example, I've heard that Faker for fun has been learning English, right? So he knows a little bit. Well, here's the thing. I mean, I realize someone like that does practice a lot of the day, but if someone like him even dedicated a single hour a day to English and like tried to engage with their fans, even Faker could get like a lot more value out of his career and make a lot more sponsorship. He could himself leverage his own brand a lot further, and he already is the best. So that's kind of the same example I'm giving. Like, put it this way, most people who have like pride in their work and want to get better, they understand and are capping out a lot of their skill set. Like, they're trying to improve that as much as they can. Let's say they do a really good job and they're at like 85% of their potential. The problem is once you get to that point, it's going to be like a lot of work to get even 1% more.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've never done any effort into the promotion side, that's a whole untapped area where, I mean, we're talking about, like I'm saying, an hour a day, you could be getting to like 50% of that straight away, whereas you haven't got any of that unlocked right now. And what's key is, like I say, you could be the best at promoting in the world, but if your work's crap, you're never going to be the most successful.
Right.
The most successful will always be the guy who's got really good work and then he learns to promote himself really well. Because obviously the idea is, like, the promotion is a way of like emphasizing or accelerating the success of the technically good work.
Yeah, I keep going back to the tech industry because I love how things cross over. They'll say, make a great product first, right? So make your really awesome product that people absolutely love. So if we use Faker as the comparison, he's made this amazing product. He's sick good at the game, right? But then also you have to eventually get people to know that product exists and put a little work into that. I've seen some companies, even in esports, who go, look, we've built something cool. Now they're going to come use it. Right? And that just doesn't work like that. You don't just wait for people to show up. I think it's Instagram. I was listening to a podcast. They're one of the only that's ever happened for, where they literally made something and it just somehow clicked and went completely viral. And it's a pure luck, like you happen to hit the lottery jackpot. But they say that's so incredibly rare. And you get so many founders who go, I'm going to make this new thing. It's going to revolutionize like a WhatsApp or a Twitter or whatever. But they have to work really, really hard to get people to use it. And I think it comes right back to esports as a player or a caster or a journalist, that you can make really sick content, but if you don't figure out how to get it out there, how to make yourself marketable, I mean, that's part of the job. So
Well, plus, I mean, what you just referenced there, the point is, like, obviously that did work for Instagram, but essentially the approach they took, it was almost not in their hands whether they succeeded. They just happened to be the lucky company where it did work, and so you would never give that as advice to someone else. Whereas the notion is, if you really do have a good enough product, then it is going to fit someone. And the idea is you have to figure out how to be able to reach that guy and then explain to him why it's good. Now, personally, my approach in general is like, so a lot of people what I just said there should be an incredibly simple concept, but I think most people actually think business works differently. They actually really think that marketing is tricking people who don't want your product into thinking they want it, which is actually like the anathema of my philosophy. Whereas instead, I think it's like that. I think if you really did make something really good, then there is a niche out there for you that will be interested in that thing. And so instead, you don't want to waste all your time on all the other people. If they want to get on board, cool, that's up to them. But instead of spending your time trying to trick the guy who wouldn't be into it to look at it for 10 seconds, just try and find the guy who is into it and go, look, and maybe we think similarly. Here's the stuff I've done before. Here's what I'm doing now. Are you into it? If they're into it, then they get on board. And then the key thing there, and this is why I think esports in general is succeeding, is that you don't have to get everyone. You just have to get the niche. And so the key thing for my work, for example, is that I never had to make it populist, to make it like dumb it down and be very cynical about it. Because what happened was esports as an entire scene got big enough that even the niche of people who liked my sort of stuff was big enough that it's actually quite a sizable number now. It's never going to be everyone. I'm never going to be number one on Reddit every time, but it seems to be doing well enough at the moment. There's enough of an audience out there who is into the kind of stuff I'm doing.
Well, you know, it's funny you say that. I don't know if you know this about me, but my very first foray in esports years ago was that I was in World of Warcraft as a player and a fan, and I started a blog on World of Warcraft Moonkin PvP. That is about as niche and tiny an audience as you can get, and it's where the laser chicken name comes from that everyone likes to joke about. But it sounded like this great idea. No one had done it. I'm going to write about it. I'll put out a weekly column, and I literally had like 150 dedicated weekly readers. Those people were like, they love my content, but the audience was so incredibly small, there was just nowhere to grow, right? And so you also have to keep in mind sometimes that you can pigeon yourself so small into a hole sometimes that there is no way to climb out. And eventually I had to accept the fact that while it was fun for a while, it was never going to be more than just a little fun side project for me, and that was great. But I think that a good example would be like, let's say you're a blogger right now for, I don't know, Warcraft 3, right? Warcraft 3's time is really past. There's still a niche audience for it out there, but you're unlikely to turn it into a massive journalism career unless you find a way to expand your audience. So I think you're right on there that sometimes it's just about the segment you sit in, right?
Sure, and obviously in the case of mine, one thing that I think is kind of funny is because so many people in esports, they're into one game, or they're into one part of a game, or they're into one scene within a game. To them, that's their whole world. And so if they interact with you in that area, for obvious reasons, they'll never imagine that you amount to anything more than what they see there. Right. And so what people don't realize is when I describe this process here, if someone listened to me and just thought, right, well, I'm really into this one specific type of a League of Legends type of content, I'm going to only do that, like Thorin says. Here's the thing. That is what I did, but I then problem solved around that. Since the scenario was I wasn't going to make my stuff essentially I wasn't going to get a really good job in esports, but make it so that then my job wasn't good because it was the stuff that I'm not interested in that I'm doing. Right. That's the nightmare, right? Instead, you want it to be that you have the job, but it's doing the stuff you're interested in. So the problem becomes, what if the stuff you're interested in is niche? So for example, in the past, I used to write about Counter-Strike, or I did about StarCraft 2, and you can have the niche there is going to be smaller because the overall slice of the overall pie is smaller, so your slice is much smaller. Well, the way I problem solved there was I had to learn, unless I'm going to give this up and compromise it and do aspects of work that I don't like or I'm just not interested in, then I have to find a way to get multiple niches at once. So that's why I became one of the, I mean, you notice there's still not that many people where I'm a journalist, but I'm a journalist in multiple games. And now at this point in time, I might be on like my 6th or 7th game or something, So these are all games I've found something that I'm interested in, that I've got some different type of niche in. Because for example, in some games, I try to be the expert analyst who breaks the game down. In other games where that's not my role, I'm the host, or I'm the interviewer, which is more of a passive role. I'm not trying to bring my knowledge forwards. Or I just give my perspective and I call it an opinion and I don't make it try to be like some amazing analytical breakdown. So in that sense, I've managed to kind of like build out horizontally and take over a lot of little niches so that now I can have an actual career doing it. Whereas it's true, maybe if you did do a very niche one thing in one game, I don't know if you could always make a career off that. But again, it's about how you laterally think. Is there a way to problem solve around that? And I'm lucky that I've found a way to do so far, at least.
As we've brought on new writers to the site, we've noticed this where at first you have these very dedicated people. Like Empire's a good example. Like he is League of Legends, League of Legends. Like that's what he loves. He's passionate about, and I think he writes great content. But then you get guys like Stuchu, or like I'm trying to think of somebody else that came on recently. But people who are like, I'd like to do this other game. Everyone knows me for this one game. I'd like to try a second game. So we say, yeah, sure, why not? Give it a shot, right? Let's see what you can bring to that audience. And the challenge you have then is number one, your audience expects that first game, right? So if you were a League of Legends writer and all of a sudden you write about Counter Strike, people go, what? Well, I don't even follow that game. But I think a little bit of what's changing though, and maybe this is just my perspective as being someone who has a lot of friends who are, we'll call them casuals. I think I'm getting closer to that now that I run an organization that I don't get to watch as much anymore. Obviously, I'm busy running the company. I know a lot just from being in the industry, but I don't physically sit down and watch as many games anymore. Right? Is that they don't watch one sport, they don't even watch two. They watch five, six, seven. They watch whatever's on because it's an entertainment factor. And you go back to the casual traditional sports fan who goes, "What's on ESPN? What's on the regular network? Oh, there's football on, there's soccer, there's basketball, there's baseball." They may have a team in every game, or they may not even. They may just be watching solely because they want to watch competition. And I know that, like, I came in as a fan of Warcraft, as a fan of League of Legends, and a fan of Hearthstone. Those were the three games I like to watch. Now I watch Counter Strike. I haven't played Counter Strike or watched it before I started watching it in the past 4 months, but I haven't played it in 15 years. I've never touched Smash Brothers, never ever, and I love watching it. I've gotten addicted to every major Smash tournament I put it on, and I've people in the office who will start talking about, oh, I've just started catching on to Street Fighter, or I've just started catching on to Dota or whatever. I think that's going to start happening more as we start going, well, the hardcore audience is always going to only be in any sport, what, 5% of your audience? I'm making up internet statistics. The other 95% just really loves watching competition, and it's much easier for them to cross over to a new game because it's about the competitive aspect, not about I'm an expert at League of Legends or I'm an expert at Dota or whatever. Shifting topics a little bit here, though, because you have a very wide view of the industry as a whole, a lot's happened this year, right? So we've seen big VC money come in, we've seen massive acquisitions, we've had ESEA, DreamHack, MLGs, you name it, Alpha Draft. We've Turner coming in with the TV rights. We have ESL saying they're going to be doing TV stuff this year. You said 14 years. I know that every time I talk to somebody who's been around a long time, they get nervous about things like CGS in the past and stuff of that nature when we start talking about either big money or TV or anything like that. Thorin, where do you stand on a lot of these things? How do you feel about where the industry sits here in 2016?
I mean, in terms of the TV stuff, the beauty of the TV stuff is, to me, it's just like basically, esports is basically. Let me think what you call it. Okay, so there's a term in poker, they say free rolling, and it's the idea that either you play a contest that it's free to enter, or, for example, you've already made it to a certain point, and at this point you can't lose if you go in on these cards or whatever. And it's the idea that it doesn't really matter what the outcome is, but you could get a benefit from it as well.
Right.
So to me, esports in terms of TV stuff is free rolling, because they're in a scenario where if it doesn't work, if it fails completely, and let's say TV leaves in even 1 year, it doesn't matter, because esports in terms of online, internet viewership, etc., only seems to increase and continually takes advances, and we're figuring out better ways to get money through that system. And so regardless, esports will continue to succeed for the next coming years, regardless of what happens with TV. Now, obviously, if it went really well with TV, then we could double up. Maybe that could be its own vector that brings in people who only watch TV, and then we have the internet audience as well. That could obviously be a way to grow the scene as well.
Right.
But the reason why I make that point initially is because the key point is that unlike CGS and the way the industry went all in on that, it will not make or break anything about esports if the TV aspect fails.
Right.
Now, maybe it will make some of the non-endemic sponsors slower to get in because they understand TV already. And if you can show them this number on TV, you can show them that your team's on this sector being watched by this many TV viewers, that will be a lot easier to sell in terms of marketing dollars than showing the same number on Twitch, where they don't really understand what does that mean and how many of those people can buy my product. They don't understand
Most of
the
them haven't
demographics.
even heard of Twitch, right? Like, there's still a ton of them that have never heard of Twitch, which is crazy considering it was bought for $1 billion last year, right? Like, crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, the point there is, if it works, the success path is more obvious because it's already laid out. And if anything, that's what a lot of those businessmen understand, actually. They wish it worked on television so they could understand it.
Yeah.
Now, if it doesn't, though, I don't think it's as big a deal because for me, I think it's very much a toss up as to whether it will work on television. I'm really not sure. Here's one of the funny things. A lot of the people in the industry now who are considered like legends of esports, ask them about television now and they'll tell you all the stuff like, oh, well, I don't think esports needs television. And, in many ways, we shouldn't ever kind of like kowtow to television and change our ways to them. All those people telling you that, pretty much, all sold out, were working for these television channels, were doing all sorts of shit where they were just shilling, basically constantly for these companies, telling everyone in esports, this is wonderful, we've all got to get in on this. And when they got burned completely, magically they became born again, and suddenly, they realized the evils of alcohol, and now they're sober for like 2 years, man, look at this chip here. But they never tell you that part, of course. They just present it now as though they knew better all along. I'm not exaggerating. Back when CGS started, I literally told all the people I knew, this will never succeed. I don't know how this has any chance at success because I saw the basic setup, which was it's on cable television, which you have to pay for. It was on DirecTV.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, because it's a cable television show, if you know anything about cable television, and because I'm a buff of like movies and television, I knew a little bit about how network television works. And the famous thing about network television is they only care about numbers.
Yep.
They don't give a flying about the quality of the show, whatever. That's why reality TV show dominates television now, because that brings the numbers for very little investment, and it beats out other things in its sector. And so I thought to myself, wait a minute, how many people even watch stuff like Counter-Strike Source online anyway, or even Counter-Strike 1.6? I mean, luckily at the time we were lucky if we got 40,000 people watch a match. So let's imagine every one of those viewers was on the TV channel. That's already failed right there. That cannot succeed.
Yeah, that's horrible for TV.
And most of those people aren't going to be on there because remember, they're all people online. They don't even have. I mean, if I live in Germany, I'm not watching direct television in North America with cable subscription. I don't even have it.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, even if this went like way above the numbers we expect it to, it can't succeed, never mind relative to esports, it can't succeed in television, because think about it, the other thing about network television is, because they go on numbers, we know a lot, we can all list off shows that we all loved that got cancelled, that were wicked shows, like the story was awesome, the writing was great, and sometimes you look into it, and the thing that infuriates you is, if the show was really failing, say the show had like 100,000 viewers, I'd understand from the television channel, they're not a charity, they can't keep running this show, they have to make money. But the ones that infuriate you is when you hear the stories about certain TV shows that were really good shows, and you look at the numbers and you go, those are pretty good numbers. But what you find out was they either saw that on their competing channel at the same time slot, something was doing bigger numbers, or they thought to themselves, kind of like I said with the reality TV show thing, well, you know what, this is making okay numbers, but this other show we can do is cheaper and we think it has the chance to make twice as many numbers.
Yep.
That's when they would cancel it. And so that's when, to me or you, intuitively, if we don't know about the business, it doesn't make sense. It seems counterintuitive to cancel a great show that's doing well, but you can see how the TV demands are very different to what our demands are, which is that it be a good show. So in this kind of a world, I'm still not sure that esports can work on television and it can be big enough to be like a legit thing where it's worth investing millions of dollars. I think now's probably the better time to try it than before, because they did so many things wrong. But I still think it's very uncertain. And by the way, I'll say that even if I end up working for them and whatnot, because I just think it's realistic. Yeah. But like I said, the key thing to me is that now at least everyone's not essentially selling up the house and moving out to the big city to go on the team, and then if it breaks down, we're all in the ghetto. That's not no.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, we even talk about Turner, how they're like, it's a small portion of the season, right? Like they're not trying to be overall take the whole year up, and they're not trying to say you must commit to us only and all those kind of things, which I think is kind of critical. And I think that maybe they've learned from what was done in the past. What's interesting about your comment about being in Germany and watching is I actually live in the U.S. and I remember when Heroes of the Storm was on, and I'm not a Heroes of the Storm fan, but I said, oh, this is really big, I should just check it out, and realized I had no way to access it because I don't own cable. I didn't have any of the subscriptions that allowed me to see ESPN3 or whatever, and I was like, I'm literally locked out of this event. And so there's a really delicate line between forcing people to the television and using the television in conjunction. You mentioned the idea of bonus viewers, and I think of in terms of I mean, I'm 36 years old, so I have friends who are in their 40s. They aren't necessarily the type to go watch on a streaming service, right? Like they don't know, they've heard of Twitch, it's not a thing they would do. I'm curious, and I don't know the answer, if they flicked on, TV channel and ESPN, all of a sudden there was esports on, would they watch it? I think they might. These are traditional sports fans who don't have anything against esports. They've just never gotten into it. So you mentioned this idea of, you're right, there's no way it's going to be, I normally watch online, now I'm going to go watch offline. That's rarely going to happen, right? But are those guys who are like, I'm 42 years old, I missed that ride by a little bit where it's just not as relevant for me to watch streaming, and you know what? This just came on after a baseball game, let's say, for example, that I was watching, and I really like competitive thing. I'll check out this Counter-Strike match. So I think it's a possible thing. I'm with you on the fact that I think that it's a wide range, right? It could be massively successful or massive failure and everywhere in between. It's not like a set anywhere on the spectrum, I don't think.
I mean, here's the thing. In theory, if esports can survive long enough, one day, as long as television still exists, it will have a place on television, just from the logic that the difference is, in 10 more years, it might be me and you who aren't in esports anymore, and then we decide to watch it because we know what esports is or we understand the concept, and so it's very easy for us to get in if we have a television,
right,
and that's all we're watching. So I could understand that part. That part could have a life cycle where it could naturally take care of itself. It's like, I think part of the reason why, okay, so when I was a kid and I used to really like to read comic books, there were almost no good superhero movies when I was a kid. In fact, as a result, almost every movie that was in the 90s and the early 2000s, I watched them all, even if they were crap. Like, there was a Fantastic Four movie that was in the 90s, that was a TV movie that was appallingly bad. Like, you should look it up on YouTube. You should see how bad the effects are on the Thing. Like, it's an actual disgrace how bad the like the costume was he had, But at the time, because there were none, I was so desperate to watch these movies. But the thing is, I understand why at the time you couldn't necessarily sell some people on the idea that, like, hey, you want to watch a movie about like superheroes and people do that, they'd be like, oh, I think that's for kids, like, that's not for me. But now those are the most popular movies in the world. Those are the most easy movies to franchise, because world practically that watches movies, at least American movies, there we go, I've put the caveat in there, that watches American movies knows who Superman is, probably has either read or played a game or watched a TV series that has something to do with it. So the basis is there, that if you then bring something good along, it's not like they have to get their head around a whole concept like some guy in like 1980 would if he was like, what, I don't know what that comic is, and is that for kids, is it for me? Like,
right,
people have the basic kind of palette to appreciate the superhero movie. So I think eventually that is a way that it could succeed on TV. The only factor then isn't even esports. It's, can TV survive that long?
Yeah,
because at the moment, it looks like there's kind of a split coming where maybe TV will be like, there's Twitch, and then eventually it'll keep going that way,
Yeah, I think that's why things like Sling, I think, is a perfect example where Sling's gone, all right, well, we'll take the few relevant TV stations people care about, and we'll just give you those. And then all of a sudden, if that starts being successful, in combination with Hulu and Netflix and such, and then half of television networks die off because no one's getting cable anymore, does that eventually lead to the fact that there isn't any networks, And there will always, in my opinion, be some television until an older generation literally isn't around anymore, because my parents' age, their friends, they watch a lot of television, right? They watch a lot of television. They watch every single day. TV's always on. They don't want to mess with Netflix. They don't want to mess with Hulu. They like to just turn on the TV and see a home show, or turn on the TV and check what sports game's on, right? So that's going to be that kind of dividing line in a way. But there's actually a statistic I saw last year that between 18 to 36-year-olds, primetime TV viewing's down 13% that in 3 years, in just 3 years. That is massive for a 3-year decline. I mean, imagine how many people they've lost in that period of time. And you sell sponsorships based on that. You sell ads space based on that. So there's this little critical point where do they fix the money to allow it to go on, right? Where the costs match the cost to run the program matches what's going to be able to come in, because the advertiser is going to go, well, you've lost 13% of your viewership. We're not going to pay that kind of money. Or does that spiral into now less programming, less lower quality? Then the viewers go away even more. Now we're getting more things like Amazon's doing their own shows, Netflix doing their own shows, all those things. I mean, that's what I end up watching a lot of times. I watch Netflix programming. I watch Amazon programming. It's going to be very rare, even as a 36-year-old, that I'm just going to turn on television and flick channels. I've got to be really bored, and I've got to be really, I just don't care what I watch, I guess. And that's, at least for me, that's not me anymore.
And it kind of relates back to what I said about my view on my own work, which is the idea that a lot of the problem of the past of trying to get stuff like television is because, like I said, the gap between the esports viewership and what television wants to have a successful show was so huge that you were literally going to have to not only get everyone in esports, but forget them. You needed the 80% of the other people who currently don't watch to watch. So again, it's going to come down to, if it's not something that they're interested in, you're going to have to almost trick them or convince them they're interested in it. Whereas to me, part of the reason why esports is succeeding more now is because naturally the niche of people who are into esports within gaming itself, gaming gets bigger, the niche gets bigger, and so the niche now looks huge. Yeah. Whereas actually it's still just a niche. Like there's still, I mean, League of Legends is the perfect example. I always tell people this. As an actual esports game, in its own weird way, League of Legends has been fairly unsuccessful because the conversion rate of total players to people who watch the World Championship is actually not that high. I think it's something like a 30th or like, let's say, like, even if I was more reasonable, let's say like a 15th of the total player base even bothers to watch the best games. It's not actually that big a conversion, but the key thing is, as long as there's the 30 million, who cares? You're still going to get 1 or 2 million or 3 million or whatever. So actually, I think that concept in general can work for esports a lot, as long as those entire sectors keep growing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's, I look at baseball a lot, and people will give me a hard time for this. I think baseball has a lifespan, for example, because baseball is not growing naturally in numbers. It relies a lot on television in a slower society. And I'll use it as the opposite of esports fans. If I look at a young kid growing up and they're going to watch X number of hours, and where they're going to put those hours, either they're more likely to go all into esports, or if they're both, they're more likely to go heavier into esports on average. And that's not true across all sports. Of course, things like the NBA is doing very, very well. NFL is doing very, very well. Football over in Europe does very, very well, etc. But there have to be casualties, right? In the fact that we can't support every single piece of thing on television because of the fact, or sorry, on broadcast now. I use the word television. That's showing my age right there. On broadcast, because there's only a certain number of hours in the day to watch things. So I think that's really relevant. Is the natural audience growth is going to be really important there in esports, because what does baseball have to do then? Do they have to force audience growth? Do they have to trick you, as you say, into watching things? You know, bat day at the stadium, come in, get your free baseball bat. That's how we get you there. As opposed to esports just goes, hey, we know you're going to watch this. We're not going to force you into anything. We're just going to tell you it's there. I think the NFL is the good correlator for that. NFL does not have to work to sell tickets. They do not have to work to get viewership. They just say, hey guys, it's Sunday. The NFL is on and people watch it all around the globe at this point. So, shifting gears a little bit here, so there's theoretically some people out there that might be looking at, what if I want to be a journalist? What if it's something that I'm looking at as a career, or just esports as a whole? You've come up through the trenches, we'll say, right? And so obviously it's changed a bit since when you were coming into the industry. Certainly there's a lot more opportunities now. There's theoretically more money to be made, but there's more ways to be screwed now. Also, there's that as well. What are maybe some things you would say to somebody who came to you? You said people ask you for advice. I'm a journalist. I think I want to do this. I wrote for my high school newspaper, etc. And I think this is what I want to do. What should I be doing, Thorin? What's your advice?
I mean, just as a caveat, as a disclaimer at the beginning of this topic, I don't want anyone watching this to try and ask me for advice, because in general, like, I have way too many people ask me already, and as a result, I have to ignore 90% of those. I have a job and my own life to live, believe it or not. So I only usually give advice to people who I know on a personal basis, like someone who I know is a good writer, and then they just say like, oh, what do you think of like the way I put the title on this, or what, I'm having this problem at the moment with this site, what shall I do? That's not normally in life in general. I think you should never force advice upon people. Like, you should never look at someone and go, oh, I can see you've got a problem here, here's how you fix it, because I think that's kind of obnoxious. Yeah. So I think, first of all, people should always come to you, but also I think you should only really give advice when the person here's the thing, they have to have put in at least a certain amount of effort themselves, because I think the majority of the initial things you can only learn yourself. Because to some degree, you can only learn anything yourself. What happens is the really good teacher is just a tool for the student to teach himself something more, because he has someone where, instead of the analogy I'd give would be, a really good teacher is like a search engine. So all the information's out there. You could have looked it all up yourself, but if you know what you're searching for, which takes a bit of skill to even know what you're looking for, then you ask that guy and he can tell you very quickly, like, okay, it's basically what says on page 33 of this book on this line, instead of having to read the whole book yourself. Right. So first of all, everyone who starts, don't make the first thing you do going and asking people for advice. It's really obnoxious. You have no skill set at the moment. You have to learn the basics. This goes for anything in life. So the first thing you should be doing for the first few months, if you actually want to get good at something, is just work on the fundamentals over and over and over again. So if that's writing, that means first and foremost, you better be writing a lot. Yes. And you're going to go, yeah, but I'm not very good now. Is this the right way to do it? No, you better write more now than you do later on. If anything, if you want to do only a limited amount, make that when you're amazing and you just want to do only a cream of the crop pieces. For now, you need to do as much as you can in writing, for example, because you want to make as many mistakes as you can and have as many chances yourself to figure out trial and error what is the correct way to do it. And as you start to gain some competency and you learn about things like the craft of writing or how your grammar works, or even there's actually a great book if you want to learn to be a writer. It's called, I think it's called The Elements of Style. It's a very old book, but it just tells you basics of like specific rules on grammar to remember at certain points in time, or how to phrase something and how not to make something last too long and how to keep it, have pitch and pace and punch, right, and all these very basic things that I'm sure everyone who now is listening is like, I want to be a writer. I bet you were all in your mind like, yeah, okay, I'll do that, and you'll never do that. So I know, right? You won't even go and read a very simple, by the way, this book's like less than 100 pages long, so these are the very simple things you could do that tomorrow could be improving your efforts better than, there's no secret I'm going to tell you. But in general, I would say the first things first. I can obviously only speak from my own experience. I don't know what's helped other people, but first things first, whatever you're doing, whatever you're working on, has to be something that's really interesting to you. Yeah. If it's really interesting to you, then ultimately, even if it fails, say no one watches it. In fact, let's say 5 people watch it, all 5 of them tell you this is absolute trash, you should just quit now. As long as you really enjoyed it and you understood what you were going for there, and maybe you didn't succeed in every way, but there was a merit to it, and you can see, right, if I worked on something like that again next time, maybe I could improve a little bit, and I did kind of get this point out that I wanted to. As long as that's all there, you now have a basis where you will get some level of personal satisfaction from whatever work you are doing. Now, once you've gotten that and you keep working on that, and not only are you satisfied in it's something you can enjoy doing and are trying to accomplish, and there's a goal there personally, but as you work on your skill set, more people are going to be interested in it. So then the other thing is what I referred to at the beginning of the interview. Now you also have to work on taking what you did that's really well and figuring out how to translate it to someone. So how to explain to this person what's cool about it. You can't just say, it's an interview with this really famous player.
Right.
What was it about in the interview that was interesting in it? Or was there some unique aspect, like maybe one answer he gave that'll tease people to come in? So then you have to start working on the other side. The problem is, I feel like a lot of people, they want to skip all the different steps and they just want to quickly come into this perfect place where it's all working out. And even worse, they genuinely believe that some of the people who were in the top of the industry ever had that to skip all that stuff and got past it. Whereas we didn't. As far as I know, almost everyone I know who's good had to grind, and they had to work through it, and they made mistakes, and they had to figure out a lot of things. And the key thing is, those people are successful now because they put in a massive amount of work, but with like a reflective quality to it. Yep. Like they didn't just do it and thought they were amazing and then never fixed anything. Like this is one of the funny things. So when I said at the beginning that I don't do things for the fans, I don't do it in any way. That's not to say that I just do a piece and think that's fucking amazing, I'll do that. I do for my persona as a joke. I pretend that's what I do. It's the opposite. The reason why I don't waste my time looking at what all the fans say about it is because I'm more attuned myself to what mistakes I make and where I need to fix them. And I'm spending so much of my own time on that I don't really need someone who doesn't have any expertise in writing or articles to go, I think it's too long, without giving me any specific detail, Right. I'll know myself when I read it back, like, okay, yeah, you probably should have made this a bit more condensed, or you made 2 points here where one of them would have served you better, I can figure it out myself because that's a core focus of what I'm doing. So I think also you have to be like the ultimate critic of your own work, not in a way where you put yourself down, but just thinking to yourself, I did the best I could do now, but how do I make it a bit better next time? I think these basic principles, which sound extremely simple, is what will make you really good. Because I've noticed in any field in life, if you go and you find the best director of all time, or the best basketball player of all time, or the best in business, you'll nearly always find they're the ones who perfected the fundamentals of that area to a level that other people didn't. And yeah, they might have also had something else that, so for example, with someone like Steve Jobs, you might think, it was like his way of speaking or his flair. Those are all side things. Those are all this other part of the circus. He actually had to have a talent for how to think and then structure his thoughts and critique himself and know how to motivate people. He had all these very fundamental management skills that people overlook because that's not the sexy part of the job, is it?
Well, you're an NBA fan like I am. I'll use the corollary you're just giving. Ray Allen. So anybody doesn't know Ray Allen, he's one of the all-time greatest players in NBA history. industry. Guy has crushed my hopes and dreams as a San Antonio Spurs fan more than once. But Ray Allen, famously 38, 37 years old, doesn't matter. He's still near the tail end of his career. Every single day in the gym, shooting free throws, shooting three-pointers, like a routine. Steve Nash, another one of the all-time greats. Every single day in the gym, dude would have his back in like crazy pain. He's like, I don't care. I'm going to make these shots. And the reason is because the second they stop doing that, they always say, you're either going up or you're going down. That's it. There's no on top. People think you can plateau and you can't. Because if you're not and you are plateaued, someone else is coming up behind you, so the gap is closing basically. So if you're LeBron James, if you don't think LeBron James works his ass off on his game, then I think you're out of your mind. I think you don't get to see it all behind the scenes. There's probably more sometimes certain players can do, and some are more gifted than others, and they always get a better opportunity, like you said. There's talent, of course, involved. But if you're going to compare two people of the same talent level, I come from theater, right? And so that's my 10 years I spent. I had this friend who, he was a really solid actor, like really solid, but he wasn't the best, he wasn't the worst, like just a really solid actor. I have had lots of friends who were really, really great and really, really terrible, and everyone in between, of course. I watched this one friend work 7 days a week for decades, just as hard as possible. And he was the guy who would get up super early, stay up really late, and everyone in between just work. That's all he was focused on, was being the best actor ever. This guy's now been in movies with like Bill Murray. He's been directed by Spike Lee. He's been on stage with Robin Williams. I mean, he's had an extremely successful career. And is it because he's the greatest actor ever? Absolutely not, right? Like, he's a solid actor. He's not the greatest. But he took those tools and said, I will not let these go to waste. And I think that people talk about hard work a lot, but they don't know what that means to implement sometimes, right? You mentioned people wanting to come to you for advice before they've done anything. I'll even take it a step further and say, we'll post a job, and people will come to me and say, I'm super passionate about esports. You should hire me because I'm super passionate about esports. And I want to say, okay, that's great. If you're so passionate about esports, show me how you've done that then, right? I volunteered here. I started this little side project there. Like, I was so passionate that I didn't wait for the job to come along. I just did whatever I could get my hands on in the meantime. And I'm so busy right now that I'm going to have to drop those things to take this job. But they were all really great, successful, even tiny things. And you see it a lot in theater, because I go back to theater again. They'll be working in 3 off-Broadway shows, and they're waiting tables to pay their bills, and they're going to acting class and doing all those things, waiting for the break, versus the person who goes, you know what, that's not a big enough show, I'm not going to do that. I'm waiting till I get the Broadway one. I'm waiting till the movie call comes. And they're the ones who don't get those calls because their craft gets poor. They likely aren't going to get noticed, and they're going to miss the opportunity. So again, a lot of crossover there, entertainment industry, so as a whole.
Also, I mean, to give you a similar analogy to what you're talking about here, it's the idea that the person who's making the excuses, right, who needs everything to be perfect before he'll ever step even a foot in the pool,
Yep.
He's the guy where he will never succeed because he will never even be there when the opportunity was going to come. So to me, just as if you were an actor, the idea is you don't know really where the guy's going to give you the movie part or where it's going to be the right. The idea is you're searching constantly. And while you're searching, you keep doing a good level and you're keeping pieces of your work around that people can see, and you've got something tangible, what you're doing. And you're hoping that by giving yourself as many lottery tickets as you can, eventually someone does see you in something, go, hey, it could maybe do something in my play. Or they send out a script and you read it and you go for that one audition out of the many you fail, and eventually you get it. It's the same in esports. One of the reasons, even before I learned the part I was referring to at the beginning about like how to market myself and become my own brand, one of the reasons I was always able to have a job is because even in periods of time where, you know, I'd left one site or there wasn't quite a good enough job in this area, what my old principle used to be, there might be only 6 people in the world who could give me the job I want right now.
Yep.
So my job isn't to try and convince everyone that I'm amazing and I'm always good. I just have to make sure those 6 people know who I am and that I'm doing good work. And in doing so, I could literally go through my whole career and pick out just one person here, one person here, one person here, one person here. And just because that guy thought I was doing a really good job, or he saw how I'd improved, or he saw how my work could bring numbers or something like that, just because I got to that guy, it always meant that that's why I was always able to keep working. I could always have a job. I could always have another site that wanted me when I left this one site here. Even if at the time I wasn't one of the biggest names in the way that some of the other people were and who'd been very successful in terms of marketing themselves. So the key thing is as well, just there's no point making excuses, because like, and to me, it's like I always say, the person who makes the excuse, There'll nearly always is some merit to it. Like, yeah, maybe things didn't break the way they wanted to, or maybe they did something good here and somehow this time it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Whenever they give the excuse is almost always a reason to then give up. Just be like, well, because of the excuse, I mean, I'll just wait and see how things go. That sort of person has just told you there why they will never succeed.
Yeah.
So if they do, it'll be an absolute miracle, like maybe the Instagram example you given before. But because they've just allowed the one opportunity that might ever come is the only way they could succeed, it's not going to happen. No one's going to find you and pick you out of a crowd and say, I know it deep in your heart, you really want to do this and you'd be amazing at it. Here, come here, have all the resources to do it. Instead, it's the opposite way. You have to be like beating down their doors to the extent that someone eventually might not even know you're good and be like, you know what, okay, just give this guy like a small thing. And then you blow that out the water and then you succeed. That's one of the things I always tell people in esports. The person who says, oh, I could do what you do, I could do exactly what you do if I had the salary and all that stuff, you will never have that. Because the key thing was, I did it before I had the salary. That's how I got the salary, by showing someone I could do these things and I could expand in this way. Like, for example, one of the things that's quite popular for me at the moment is my YouTube channel, obviously. When I started the YouTube channel, I made next to nothing off that. You get a very little off just ads on videos alone. So most people would go, well, why am I going to put in all these hours each day making videos that are not going to make much money when other areas of my job are much more productive? And at the time, I didn't actually know that that could ever become productive as it has now. But I just thought, well, there's a merit to doing this. I think these videos are good. I think they might have their audience. And so in time, eventually, it did grow to the point where now that is an income for me. But if I'd have sat at the beginning and said, right, I'll only do these videos if you can justify that I need like $2,000 a month and it has to be for these many videos, I'd have never, ever gotten anywhere. No one would ever give me that deal. And I'm someone who's been in the industry for a long time, so you got to create these opportunities, or rather be there for when the opportunity is available. Otherwise, you'll never be able to take advantage of them.
I'll take another non-esports story, as much as chat will flame me for it. When I was in theater, maybe 6 years into my career, I had just taken every job that I really, again, I was passionate about. I loved these jobs. I was very proud of the fact that I spent 7.5 years in New York City and never waited tables. I worked in my field, and it was always something that I really loved. And about 4 or 5 years in, I got this opportunity where I got a call out of the blue, and this guy's like, "Hi, I'm so and so. I run this performing arts school in New York City, and I am looking for someone to run the theater here." I was like, "Oh, I've never heard of this before." He's like, "Oh, well, I got your number from so and so." I was like, "I don't know who that is." And it turns out that I had just spent so much time building up credibility in the community and working a lot of those jobs and making myself relevant that somebody talked to somebody who finally said, "Hey, this guy might be good for this job." And I ended up spending 3 years working at that specific performing arts school. One of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. I worked with amazingly talented people who are now all over television and film and stuff like that. And I wouldn't have had that opportunity if I just sat waiting for it to come, like you said, right? I had to put myself in the right position. So I didn't even apply for that job. They came and found me. I interviewed and they offered me the job. It was that cut and dry. We talk about a lot of times hiring for Splyce. Most times you post a job and you end up not hiring from that posting. Like, that's just not usually how it happens. It's usually someone goes, "Oh, I know somebody that's good for that role." Or you ask around and say, "Do you know anybody?" Or you end up creating a job around somebody who literally is within your organization. We have a guy right now who works for us. He started working for us in a team, managing a team role, and now he's taking on more responsibility because he's shown a lot of potential, and now we can grow his role from a part-time team manager into eventually a full-time role. So I think that we'll boil it down to one point. We've talked for 10 minutes about this, but you make your opportunities. That's it. You make your opportunities. And I'm not some rich kid who came from lots of money and stuff like that. My mother was a waitress and my father delivered newspapers. So like, we didn't have money. So opportunities were not poured at my doorstep. I've been working since I was 9 years old. It's not a sob story, but the point being that I wouldn't be where I was today if I didn't make the effort to make my opportunities. So, and I can tell that's Thorin saying the same thing over there.
Oh, exactly. I mean, that's one of the funny things is that to the person, here's the problem. Everyone else only sees the finished product. So like with the basketball player or whatever, they just look at that guy and go, "Oh, he's just super talented." That's all it is. He's just really good at making shots. If I was that super talented, I'd love that. Whereas what they don't realize is, I mean, the reason why a basketball example is a great one is obviously most of those guys came from the ghetto and were like single parent families, and these guys had to grind and work and get through all these levels of competition and learn how to play and all sorts of incredible things to ever get to the point where you get to see them make that shot and it looks easy. So in similar fashion, I've had people my whole career who came along when I was a couple of years in, telling me that like, oh, I don't have the advantages you do, and you have a name that's known. And it's like in the UK, I literally come from the poorest part of the whole UK.
No
I come
kidding.
from the only part of the UK that, as far as I know, has no one famous in esports who ever came from this area. You have to travel about 100 to 250 miles or so to get to where some famous people ever came from, because they all come from London or big cities or places where you can easily travel from. Not only that, coming from the UK, all the big events when I grew up were in America. You had to get someone to fly you transatlantic to even go to the event. It wasn't like now where you might have a match day at Wembley or something closer in Europe. The obstacles to overcome were enormous. Because I never made these excuses, I just kept going, and then eventually I was lucky enough that some of these things I was able to accomplish. But if you ever have that mentality of like, oh, this person has all his advantages, well, okay, give up then. You're just given all the reasons as to why you're never going to succeed. So just go and cry about it. I personally, I just get on and I do the things that I'm going to do, and hopefully I have a good result. If not, you work harder to get a better result tomorrow.
I actually, one thing I would add to that is I think some people forget that when they are going through that challenge, right, where someone is like, oh, this is so tough, they have all these advantages, it's okay to feel that way as long as you get past it. And then you talk to maybe people that you know, and people who are your I don't know, advisors is the wrong word, just your friends and family, and say, here's the tough part I have. I feel like I'm not making it through. And that's why we have family and friends to help us through those things. If you're unable to, I agree with you wholeheartedly, right? There's a point where you have to accept the fact that if you aren't willing to put the work in, you're not going to get through. But everyone goes through low points. Everyone goes to a point where you feel like it's just not going to get through. It's never going to happen. I remember being 23 years old, living in New York City. What's it like, top 5 most expensive cities on the planet? I could barely afford to eat. Our rent is 2 months late. And my roommate and I literally didn't leave the apartment because we couldn't afford subway tokens. Like, that's how broke we were. But we're like, we're going to make it. We're going to figure this out. And, we got through it. But there were points where we were ready to give up, pack up the bags, go back home, forget this theater thing's not worth it, right? So you will have those things. It's about how you get through them. And I think that I'm glad I had those experiences. It makes me much more humble about things later on. When I get opportunities, I'm very grateful for the opportunities. As if they were handed to me, I feel like I might not be. So. As I try to be a stickler for time, I want to thank Thorin for being here today. Hopefully we shed some light on a little bit of this side of the industry, especially looking at somebody who's had a storied career, and a lot of times can be told a very different way, I think, your career by the fans as opposed to what's maybe actually happened throughout your story of getting here. Thorin, you want to do your shameless plugs here, as I always call this section?
I mean, if you follow me on Twitter, or in general, if you're someone who looks at Reddit, you'll see any of the content that's doing well. So I do stuff in CS:GO, League of Legends. Those are the main games, and look at my YouTube, I guess, if you want to see more of my videos. If you don't, then I wouldn't worry about it.
Thanks. And check out Splyce.gg if you want to know when matches are coming up. We have every event listed. We've got great written and video content from people like Thorin, people like Lurpus, EG and Control. Got a lot of great content up there. Even Chris Kluwe, the former Minnesota Viking, does some sports crossover stuff, which is really cool, where he looks at traditional sports versus esports. And then, of course, our pro team. We do this every week, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Try to look a little bit at the industry, and hopefully see you guys again here on the channel. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Thorin.
Yeah, no problem.